Hello, welcome back. We're now into chapters 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15, so quite a lot to go through here. But the theme is fairly simple to explain. It's about dismissal, whether that's unfair dismissal, potentially redundancy, or even breach of contract. So let's start with breach of contract. As you read through it will become very clear that employers cannot unilaterally vary the contract. I think there is a misunderstanding sometimes that perhaps you can simply give notice to an employee to say, look, you're now going to work these hours, or you're going to change location, or your pay's got to alter in some way, perhaps it's a salary reduction. And because you've given notice, the employer's got to accept the situation. Well, this isn't true, and in fact employers are in breach of contract if they vary the contract without agreement, even if they've given notice. So how should it be done? Well, the chapter will explain this, but basically it may sometimes be necessary to terminate the old contract and start a new one to avoid a breach. The chapter 11 also discusses summary dismissal, where employees are dismissed instantly without notice for serious offences, and obviously it needs to be clear in the company discipline and grievance procedures what might qualify for instant dismissal. Typically, assault and theft. Okay, the chapter 12 is continuing on the theme of dismissal. It confirms that to make a claim to the tribunal it needs 1 year's service, and just recently, and I'm recording this in sort of June 2014, but just recently the law has changed that with any claim to a tribunal for unfair dismissal, ACAS must get involved. It was more of an option before, but now it's mandatory, in an attempt to reach some sort of conciliation between the parties. And this is very much due to so many claims going to tribunals and the system struggling to cope. So that's a relatively recent change, and compulsory conciliation is something you need to have a read about. Chapter 12 also talks about constructive dismissal, where employees may allege that they've been forced to leave the organisation because of actions by their employer, that it became impossible to carry on their job, and therefore, although they resigned, they were effectively constructively dismissed. Gross misconduct, which we've discussed just now, doesn't normally qualify for notice. And there's quite a lot about redundancy and the way it works, and of course the redundancy is a dismissal. And importantly, the chapter confirms that if someone volunteers for redundancy, they're still eligible for a payment. The fact they volunteered shouldn't disqualify them from receiving a payment. With dismissal, particularly in tribunals, it is up to the employer to show that the reason was fair. In other words, the employee may claim they've been unfairly dismissed, but the onus is on the employer to show that the dismissal was in fact fair. And dismissals essentially follow along the lines of 5 principal reasons, which you'll be reading about in these chapters. And those principal reasons include issues around capability, which may be performance, or physical ability to do the job. It could be down to conduct. A person's been dismissed because they failed to reach certain standards of conduct, or an incident. And obviously redundancy, as we've just said, is a fair reason to dismiss. And when we talk about fair reason, is potentially fair, but it has to be shown to be fair if it's and particularly if it's challenged. Some dismissals are automatically unfair, for example, due to pregnancy, or whistleblowing, where somebody's reporting the organisation to an official body such as the Inland Revenue or Health and Safety Executive, it would be immediately unfair to dismiss that person because they'd made that complaint. Employment tribunals have to have a challenging job to determine if dismissals were fair, and in many respects they're not trying to put themselves in the position of the employer, which would be impossible to do. I mean, after all, they don't know the context, the individuals involved, and so on and so forth, and they didn't, attend all the meetings which may have resulted in termination. So tribunals are essentially looking at the process to determine whether it was fair and whether the employer acted reasonably, and sometimes whether another employer, perhaps the other side of town, would have made a similar decision. And obviously it is important that employers follow their own procedures and that certain principles were adhered to. For example, the right to state the case, to state a person's case, the right to be accompanied, the right to make an appeal, and so on and so forth. So if procedures are not followed properly, the employer's own procedures, then that may make the decision to dismiss unfair. And equally, the ACAS Code of Practice, although not law, is effectively the guidelines used by tribunals. So again, it's very important that the ACAS Code is followed. There's quite a lengthy definition of redundancy. You need to be clear what it is. Employers can't dismiss for some other reason and call it redundancy if it really isn't job loss or shortage of work. So please do read up about that. And Chapter 15 talks about unfair dismissal and redundancy, the need to make a claim within 3 months. It talks about the role of ACAS, and it goes into some detail on redundancy payments. So those are the headlines from these 5 chapters. Hope this little introduction will encourage you to read the chapters and also go through the slides and the Q&A, to work in your groups, and to work towards any questions which need to be answered for the assignment. So good luck. This is a really key area of HR. Understanding about dismissal is so important. So please do take these chapters especially seriously, and hope you enjoy them, and see you soon for the final video.